Hello everybody, welcome to this seventh video of the agroecology lecture. So today we will talk about seed collection. So first of all, why is it interesting to collect your own seeds? So first of all, for an economical reason for farmers, it's interesting because it reduces a lot the cost they need to plant the next crop. Of course, then if they have their own seed, they don't need to buy seed at the beginning of the crop. It's also a possibility to do a business out of it. Seed crop is kind of a high value crop. Usually you can get good price for your crop. So for instance, if you have onion and the price is not good on the market, you could produce onion seeds and maybe get really good money with it. So you can turn a normal crop into a high value crop. It's interesting for the autonomy of the producers. You don't depend on the seed seller anymore. So if there's a shortage, you can grow your crop as usual. And if the price gets high, you don't get impacted by it. And of course, it's good for the general biodiversity, for the preservation of the genetic patrimony that farmers have. So this is more a society benefit. But for the producer itself, it allows him to select crop, select varieties adapted to his needs and to his land. So basically, it allows him to make a genetic breeding. But of course, it also has some disadvantage because if you collect your own seed, you cannot buy seeds modern seed that resist to different disease or pests. So yeah, that of course is not possible. So first of all, we will look at a bit the basic needed to understand the to understand the collection of seeds. So we'll just go back on a few biology basics to be sure that everyone understand what we talk about afterwards. So you have two ways to reproduce plant. As you know, you have the vegetative reproduction using cuttings, tubers, rhizomes, shoots, etc. Or you have the generative reproduction, which is basically producing seed and planting seed. So the vegetative reproduction is the idea of using a part of the plant to recreate a new plant. It's very practical, but has some disadvantages. First of all, the new plant is not really a new plant. It's the same genetical material, so it's basically a clone. So if you spread your crop using vegetative reproduction, you always get the same individual in the field, so you really have a low genetic diversity. And then by doing so, you will also transmit the disease to the next crop, because usually through seeds the disease don't survive. So spores or bacteria, they won't stay in the seed, so the new plant will be healthy. It can be infected later, but through tubers and things like this, the viruses, bacteria stay in the tuber and infect the new plant directly at the beginning. Um, Sometimes it's not practical because it is often really heavy, like yam or potato. It's really a big quantity you have to use to plant, and usually the shelf life is not long. For tubers like potato and yam, it can last a few months to a year, but for cuttings, it can be a few days to a few weeks. So, as example, you have the yam, which is very heavy to store the planting material, and sweet potato, which is really minimal shelf life. You can keep the cutting only a few days and then it dies. But in any case, some plants do not produce seeds, so you have to reproduce them using vegetative propagation, so like potato or yam. But in this case, you really need to be careful of viruses. So as I said, you have different ways to reproduce your plants vegetatively. First of all, you can use cuttings and shoot. So you need a living plant where you take the cuttings and the shoots and you can plant them where you want to plant your crops. For example, sweet potato, cassava. It is also this way that we reproduce a lot of different grasses. So the one we saw for push-pull system, Bracharia and Pennisetum, for example, you can plant them using planting the shoots. So then another way of reproducing vegetatively is using tubers, rhizome, and corms or under earth organs. They're usually organs where the plant store its energy, so it's good to start a new plant, and they can then be used as seedling. Um, if you use this kind of a production, you really should look for disease before choosing the individuals you're going to plant. And for storage of these tubers, they should be stored in the shade. They should not be in contact with the ground. And ideally, you should allow some water to percolate to wash them constantly and keep them moist. Before planting, it's important to treat them correctly, remove wounds, rats, etc. And you'd ideally treat them, put them in ash plus water to kill and get the possible pest out of it. So yeah, that was for the vegetative production. So now we talk about the generative reproduction, so the seed production. This is more interestingly from a genetic point of view because you mix the genes of different plants, so you keep greater genetic diversity. You can do a selection, you can do breeding. You can store the seeds over several years because it's small, it has a long shelf life, and it's easy to move, to transport, to market, and to propagate. So we'll just look at a few bases to understand what to talk about later. So in a plant you have the pistil, which is the female organ, and the androecium, which is the male organ. And the androecium release pollen that will go to the pistil, fertilize it, and this will create a seed. Flowers contain either pistil or an androecium, so they can be male or female flower, or they can have both, and then they will be what we call hermaphrodite flowers. Then we have different category of plants depending on the flower. You have monoecious plant that are plants that have both male and female flower on one plant. So usually in this type of plant you don't really care, you just plant them and you never have issue with reproduction and with production as well, because often the seed is also what we harvest, so we need to work to get it. Then we have dioecious plants, and they have only one flower of the same sex on one plant. So this means you have male and female plant. So if you have male plant, you will not get either seed nor production. And if you have only female plants, you don't get anything because you don't have the fertilization. So for some crops, it's important to know for the production, but more importantly for the seed production. And then you have hermaphroditic plants that have hermaphroditic flower. In that case, you don't care neither. And of course, you have plants that have different type of um, of flowers. So for instance, papaya, as you surely know, you have male and male and female papaya, and you have hermaphrodite papaya. So you have a combination of an hermaphroditic plant and a dioecious plant. And then the second categorization we need to do is the mean of transmission. You have cross-pollinating plants that are plants that can not pollinate themselves, so they need a vector to bring the pollen from one plant to the other, and this is usually wind or insects. So, and then you have the self-pollinating plant that can pollinate themselves on the same plant. So one flower of the same plant can fertilize another of the same plant, but they still need something to shake them, and that could be wind, rain, insects, to move the pollen from one flower to the other. And self-pollinating plants are never only self-pollinating. There is always, of course, a transfer of pollen and then of gene of with the neighbor plants. So all these things is just basic biology, but just to understand this concept properly when you make seed production, because it has issue if you don't know what plants are, how they function, are they monoecious, are they dioecious, are they cross-pollinating, are they self-pollinating, you might not succeed in your seed production. So sometimes it's so important for normal production, but especially for seed production, you really have plants where you have to yeah, to take care of these aspects, otherwise you don't get any seeds. Okay, so now we will talk about how to produce the seed in reality. So what do we have to do differently that in the normal plant production if you want to have seed and not just the production? So the first of all, the time is not always the same. You have, for example, cereals. Usually it's the same because you harvest the seed anyway. You harvest the seed dry anyway, so it's really almost the same. Tomato is a bit similar, but not completely, because if you do seed production, you will only take from the first one, so it will be shorter, and you will give more care to the plant. And then you have other plants that are completely different if you produce seed or if you produce the product. For example, carrot, usually you don't put in seed at all, you just harvest the root. So if you want to have seed, you have to cultivate the crop in a complete different way. So usually if you produce seed, you should really take care that the plant get enough light, get enough nutrients, and get enough water. So it's really a plant that you should give a special care. You should water this plant really enough until flowering, and then you should reduce it to allow maturation and allow even drying of the seeds on the plant. Fertilize sufficiently, as I said before, the nutrients, and protect this plant particularly from pests and often also from rain. So it's interesting to grow them under rain protection, for instance, in a greenhouse. Spacing and staking, you should give enough space for the seed carriers and stake them well, not that they not go on the ground. You don't want to have seeds from rotting fruit. You should give really enough space. Of course, as I said before, it depends on the crop. On a cereal, you usually just harvest from the normal field, so you don't give more space. On tomato, if you want to do seed, you will give more space, even if it's the same crop management. And on carrot, you will need a lot more space for seed than just for carrot root production. Then when after the crop is produced, we need to get the seed out of the crop and prepare it. And there's different methods that we do for different crops. First of all, we can do soaking. That is for seeds that do not go well out of the pulp. For example, eggplant. So you can put it in cold water for 1 day in order to get the seed more easily out. And then either you do this or not, depending on the crop. After that, you have different ways of getting the seed out. You have the wet process without fermentation, so it's just washing the seeds with water to get the pulp out and everything, and just have the seeds, and then dry the seed as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's not possible just to do this simply, so you have to do the wet process with fermentation. So the idea is to have a ferment. It is for crops where the seeds do not get out of the pulp. So that is the case for tomato um, and cucumber. If you don't do it, you might think it's okay because you don't see anything, but you have a thin film around the seed that will prevent it from germinating. So you have to do this fermentation process. So you just put the seed with the pulp in a glass with water for a few days to get the fermentation, and then you can wash you can wash the seeds like normal. And then you have the dry root, so that means you will get the seed dry, so basically the seed is not in the fruit. So this is why it's for seed carriers that are not fruit plants or fruit vegetable. You should dry them enough. On some crops you harvest dry and you don't need to dry afterward. For example, grasses and legumes, depending, you can let it dry on the crop. And other crops like brassicas, Apiaceae, Asteraceae need to be harvested and then dried afterwards, because if you let them dry on the crop, you might lose all the seeds because it's really small and not strong seeds. And then at some point you will do threshing to get the seeds out of the rest of the plant, and you will remove all the waste to have only the seed. Of course, if you do seed collection, you can do selection. So of course you will try to take the seeds of the most productive and the healthiest seed carriers. You should not take seeds from the sickly individuals or the small individuals. When you have fruit production, you should always take seeds from the first fruits, not from the next. Like tomato, you can produce for a few weeks or months, but if you take seeds, you take them from the first fruits, which are the best, where the plant produces the best seed material. Don't take, of course, seeds from a sick plant, of course not from a sick fruit or sick seed. And then, of course, you could do more advanced selection, more advanced breeding, but we will not talk about this in this lecture. After this, we just talk a little bit about the conservation. So you need to have really dry seeds in order to store it properly and keep its germinating capability. Uh, Ideally, you can put them in bags, in glass jars, to protect them from moisture, from pests, from basically everything. It's really good if you're able to put them in glass jar. And ideally, you should put them in a cool, dark, and dry room, ideally between 0 and 10 degrees. It's difficult to find such place sometime in Africa. A possibility is to do this desert fridge for your seeds, because usually it's not big amounts of seeds for vegetable, I mean, that you have. So you could do this with clay jars and water or sand between the two clay jars. Then you can get a really cold temperature inside to store your seeds. So this is just a possibility if you don't have a cool room. We categorize the seeds in four categories depending on the shelf life. So you have very sensitive seed that only have a shelf life of a few months, short life 2 to 3 years, medium life 4 to 5, and long life more than 5 years. So now it's just the idea to look at the different families and to see the the properties of the different seeds of the family. So you have the Solanaceae, the tomato family. So they are self-pollinated. They are hermaphrodite. So basically, you don't really need to worry about anything when you produce seeds from them, except that you need the plant to be shaken. So if you're in a greenhouse, you need to have some wind insects or by hand to get the pollen from the flowers to the others. If you want to produce seed, you need from 6 to 12 plants to have enough production and diversity. You should stake them, of course, not that the tomato or eggplant on the ground come. Harvest the fruit when they are ripe, ask for consumption, use healthy fruits, and as I said before, just take fruits from the first fruits of each plant. So here a table with the different Solanaceae, tomato, pepper, chili, eggplant, how you should treat the seeds with fermentation for tomato, otherwise without fermentation, and the shelf life of different crops, and for indication how many seeds you can expect per fruit. Then we have the Cucurbitaceae, the squash family. They are cross-pollinating and monoecious. You should have 6 to 12 seed carriers. You will have 100 to 300 seeds per fruit, a shelf life of 3 years. And what you should really be careful with cucurbits is you have a lot of different cucurbits, different squashes, pumpkins, and things like that, cucumbers. And there's a few species, and a few squash are from this species, a few squash are from the other, a few pumpkin are from this species, a few from the other. So you can really get cross breeding of different squash or pumpkin species that you maybe do not want. So you should really be cautious if you plan to produce seeds of cucurbits to not have two different varieties of the same species near another. Otherwise, you will get a cross breeding of these two species, and you won't get the results that you want. So this is really to be careful with cucurbits, because sometimes we don't know that they are from the same species because they are so different. You should when you do seed, you should really harvest them when they are perfectly mature. So this means when the stems get out of the fruit and the fruit is left on the ground. And you can get cross-pollination with wild species around it that can bring a toxic character in the plant. So if you have a bitter squash or pumpkin, you should not eat it or reproduce it or anything, because it's possible that you have an input from a wild plant that made it toxic. So the same table are for the Solanaceae with the different treatment you should use, when to harvest, do you need staking, and the different family, different species, sorry. Then we have these families of Asteraceae, Amarantaceae, Brassicaceae. In this case, I put them together because the cultivation for seed is completely different than that of the crop. Because from cabbage and salad, you usually eat the vegetative part. You use the leaves, or maybe the flower, or maybe the root. So it's really completely different if you want them to produce seed. So of course, you should not eat the leaf or the root or the flower if you want to produce the seed. Then so you leave it, and then after it produces this vegetative product that you do not harvest, it will then go to a generative production and produce flowers and seed. In these cases, you should harvest the grains before full maturity, otherwise they will fall by themselves and get lost, because this is usually really small seeds. You should really protect the seed carriers from rain, because as I said, they're really small and not strong, weak. So with rain or wind, they can really be lost quickly. Usually we harvest the whole plant, you dry it, and then you thresh it in a bag in order to get all the seeds, and then you have to clean it because you have a lot of residues in it. And of course, you need to give a lot more space for the seed carriers as for the normal crops, because they can get really big. So a few examples with the same table, you can find it in the script you have for all the different crops. Yeah, the different information you need if you want to produce the seeds of this crop. Now we'll just look at one specific case, lettuce. It is self-pollinating and hermaphrodite. You need 10 plants to get a good diversity of seed production. You have per 10 grams of seeds per plant. You can it's in category 3 of storage life, and you don't need tutor. But it's really an example of how big it can become in comparison to the normal lettuce, which is really a really small crop. And then we have carrot and onion of the Apiaceae and Alliaceae family. They are both allogam, and they are sometimes a bit tricky to produce. So I'll give a few information on them here. Basically, what is sometimes difficult is usually the cycle is so that you plant you plant a seed after. I mean, these are crops that are from a temperate region, like in Europe. So when you plant the seed, usually you get 1 year, you will get first a carrot, so the root, or you on an onion, and then it will winter, and with the cold, and the next year you can plant the onion or the carrot, and these years it will go to seed, but it needs this cold period of storage before it goes to seed, uh, usually in Europe, but now there are new varieties that are adapted and that often do not need this winter time anymore. But if you want to produce, you should try it. But if it doesn't work, it's possible that's because it's a variety that need a winter time and of cold before it can go to seed production. And then finally you have grasses and legumes, so they are quite easy to produce because usually you can just take the grain. You harvest the grain anyway, so you harvest the seed. So you can just take the seed, but you should take them from the best individuals before you harvest the whole crop. So thank you very much for your attention. That was it for the part about seed collection. Thank you and see you next week.